What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Ryan Trimble, and today we're going to be going down a little walk on memory lane, where I'm going to talk to y'all about my history with the Bioware games, where I've been the most passionate, where I've fallen off, my thoughts as we go down the lineage, and we're also going to talk a little bit about what got me into gaming in the first place. As you may have seen, I recently did some videos where I reacted to Summer Games Fest, putting out my top 5 most anticipated games, as well as doing breakdowns for the Dragon Age Veilguard character trailer and the Dragon Age Veilguard combat trailer. Now, if you watched any of those videos, you'll know I'm very excited about Dragon Age. In fact, it was number 2 in my most anticipated games coming out of Summer Game Fest, and I have recently started the journey of replaying Dragon Age 2 for the first time since launch. Literally have not played that game since 2011, and then I'm also going to replay Inquisition for probably the 4th time leading up to Dragon Age the Veilguard. So I thought this would be a great time to deep dive into my history with Bioware, why I love them so much, and where I think they may have misstepped a little bit. Now, before we dive into the Bioware side of it, I want to give y'all just a little bit of history about me so you know where I'm coming from and what my experience was before I ever got into any of the Bioware games. Because you may not be able to tell by this beautiful face, but I am 36 years old, which means I have been gaming for a very, very long time, and have spawned many, many different console and PC generations. So let's talk about my entry into video games. When I was a young boy. So I've been gaming since as long as I can remember. I grew up with an NES in the house, an SNES in the house, and I'm going to tell you all a few quick stories. I'm going to talk to you all about when gaming went from being just a part-time hobby, when gaming went from just a thing that happened to be in the house that I would play sometimes when I was bored, to like my number one thing that I was passionate about. And before I get into what made that transition, just a few quick stories from my childhood that I think will paint a picture. So, first and foremost, I mentioned I had an NES and SNES as a kid. I want to tell a quick story about getting the N64. So I knew I wanted an N64 for Christmas the year that it came out, and it was between the N64 and the PlayStation 1. And I remember my mom asking me, like, I was pretty sure I was getting one or the other because she kept asking questions about, like, which do you like more? Which one would you like if we could get you one? And I ended up saying that I wanted the N64. And my mom very cleverly on Christmas Day set it up so that I opened up all the presents and there was one present left, and it was roughly the size of an N64 box, or at least what I would have assumed was the size of an N64 box. And I ripped open the packaging and it was some board game or something. I think it was the memory game, the one that lights up like the different colors and you have to do the right sequence or whatever. And I remember just having to act happy. Like I remember specifically like not wanting to be a jerk and like being like, oh thanks, like this is so good. And I was trying to hide my disappointment, which I'm sure I was doing a very bad job of being a little kid. And then my mom was like, oh, I forgot there's one more thing, and it was just a card, and so I was not excited at all. And the card said like go look under the TV, and I ran into the living room and the N64 was set up under the tree. Now, despite having an N64, like that's an amazing story, and I loved the N64, but amazingly, I never once had a memory card. For those of you who aren't old enough to remember, the old consoles didn't have any hard drive space, so you had to have memory cards or memory sticks in order to save your games, and I didn't. And so I never forget like playing games like Gauntlet Legends or playing games like Ocarina of Time. I never beat them because in order to keep the story going, I just had to leave my N64 on. In fact, one time my N64 got so hot, it shut itself off because I had left it on for like 6 or 7 days straight trying to play Ocarina of Time. And so maybe that's why the games just never hooked me. But even through the N64 era, I just wasn't really that big of a gamer. Like I liked the games, I played the games. My friends and I would play like Smash Brothers, for example. Or like the original Mario Kart, but it was still just like a third or fourth or fifth favorite hobby, right? All right, so how did I go from that, which I think is most people's journeys, right? You have consoles as a kid, and you play them and you have fun, but they just are another toy. How did I go from that to being obsessed with video games the way I still am to this day as a 36-year-old? Well, it starts with one game. It starts with one game, and I'm going to show it off before we tell any stories for those of you who did not get to experience what this was like. This is EverQuest. And if you are not as old as me, you may be looking at your screen right now and thinking, what the hell is this? Right? Like, but this is what I played, and this game is what hooked me in. EverQuest is an MMO. It's a massive multiplayer online RPG in the similar vein to like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV, but this was one of the first ones. And this was the original UI. You can see every little bit of space is taken up. You have your merchant panel on the left there that he just opened. You have your inventory on the right, your little view of what your character looks like. This was the game that hooked me. And I will never forget this kid, John, from middle school, telling stories about his uncle and his uncle that played this amazing game and how he had found mithril armor and how mithril armor was the best armor you could get in the game. And that was my first time hearing of EverQuest. And somehow I got my mom to buy it for me. I'm pretty sure it had a monthly subscription similar to WoW does now. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it did. Somehow got us to play on just like the family desktop computer, and we were off and running. And I played this game for years, loved this game, got several of my friends into this game by showing them this giant nerdy book. Jeez, that did not realize the sound was on until that skeleton laughed. Giant nerdy book that had like all the information about all the characters, and got them all into this game as well. And we played this for probably 2 years. I never got good enough to do like end game, but we would do all of the like lower level dungeons, and I got up to like level 50 or something around that effect. So many great memories from this game, and this is what changed it for me. Like, this is what got me into gaming. Actually, just one quick story about this game. So I was a kid when I was playing this, right? And I'll never forget my best friend Ryan and I playing. I had gotten him into it. We were both using just our family computers, and our family computers were not good. Like, the fact that they even ran this game was astounding. And I'll never forget, we once bought RAM for his mom's computer. So we bought a new memory stick. I forget what it was. Like, it was something super small. It was like an extra 12 megabytes of RAM or something like that. But we didn't really know what we were doing. Like, we were just kids. We back then, there was no YouTube or anything for us to look it up. But we knew that RAM led to faster computers, and we knew that his mom's computer was extremely slow. And so we bought some RAM for it, and we opened up the case, and we figured out how to install it and put it all back together, and it worked. And we hit the power button, and what used to take, in my mind, it was minutes. It probably wasn't minutes, but it took a really long time for Windows to boot up on this desktop. Like, it just took forever. And we were used to having to wait. And so we pressed the power button, and we like sit back in our chairs to wait. And almost instantaneously, we heard the like Windows chime, like that Windows startup sound. And our eyes went wide, and we looked at each other, and we freaked out. We were like, oh, it's so much faster. And we were so fucking excited about this, like, minor upgrade of RAM. And it made EverQuest run a little bit better so that he could actually play online with me. And it's those types of memories, I think, that really switched us from just gaming as like a minor hobby to gaming as a major hobby. Now, the next thing I want to show is what distracted me from RPGs, and a theme of this video is going to be the what if. So if we just come back over here, soon thereafter, after playing EverQuest for about a year, we found another game. And we became obsessed with Halo Combat Evolved on Xbox. This is the first console I ever remember like needing, and getting all of our parents to buy the Xbox, playing this mode right here, Blood Gulch CTF Warthogs Only 2v2. We played this incessantly. I loved this game. And the reason that I bring it up, the reason that I show Halo in a Bioware video, is that there is an alternate reality. There is a multiverse version of Ryan that never went back to single player games or RPGs or MMOs after this. That after finding Halo, I went down the Battlefield Call of Duty rabbit hole, which I did anyway. Like I loved Call of Duty. I've played those games a lot. I've loved my time in Battlefield. But there is an alternate reality where that became my entire gaming life. But thanks to BioWare, that did not happen. And so what I want to go through for the rest of this video is just very simply my history with the BioWare games, how they impacted me, and where some of the missteps may have been. Let's go through it.
You're doing it.
We're going to start off strong. My first time playing any BioWare game was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. And I want to give just a small shout out to Jade Empire. And I know Jade Empire came out after Knights of the Old Republic, but I never played Jade Empire. I lived with two roommates at the time, Ryan and our friend Nathan, and they both played it. And I remember watching them play it, and I remember listening to them to talk through like, oh, you should be using this ability and out of this ability. And when the boss goes into this phase, you got to switch to this, whatever. And I just never played it. I've never played Jade Empire to this day. I could not tell you a single thing about the story, so we're not going to mention it in this video past this point. But I just want to, for any of those Jade Empire fans out there, I just want to acknowledge it, let you know, don't come after me with pitchforks and fire. What's that? Torches, pitchforks and torches. I'm sure that game is great. I just simply never played it. What I did play was Knights of the Old Republic. And man, Knights of the Old Republic, Coder, as it were, hit all the right notes for me. So I still am, a giant Star Wars fan. So this was right up my alley. And let's just watch this trailer for a second.
Wipe this pathetic planet from the face of the galaxy.
The Force fights with me.
Get on this gun turret. Bring her to me.
All Republic forces pull back.
It is too late to retreat.
I mean, y'all, Knights of the Old Republic hit for me in a way that few games have ever hit for me. I was a huge Star Wars fan. I still am a huge Star Wars fan, but when I say I was a huge Star Wars fan, I want y'all to understand what I'm talking about here. I was the kid my freshman or sophomore year of high school who literally brought the novelization of Attack of the Clones to school and was reading it in between classes. And I don't know why, they would have released it in this way, but they did. I remember having the book Attack of the Clones before the movie came out. So I had read the entire book. I knew the entire story prior to it releasing in theaters and me going to watch it with my friends. But I was a huge fan of Star Wars. I was at that weird age where I grew up watching the original trilogy, from seeing, my mom introducing it to me, super excited for Phantom Menace. And then in high school when Attack of the Clones come out, and then going through that, like, oh, is this bad? Like edgy teenager, like I don't like anything phase. Only to come all the way back around with the newest trilogy and be a huge Star Wars fan again. And so Knights of the Old Republic coming out when it did in particular was a godsend, and it is to this day one of my favorite Star Wars stories. I would say that Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic and I, Jedi, which is an extended universe book from the original extended universe, highly recommend it if you like Star Wars. Those are my two favorite Star Wars stories ever. And Knights of the Old Republic just opened my eyes to what RPGs and what single player stories could be. Like after years of playing Halo and really only playing multiplayer, like my whole life was playing Smash Brothers with my friend and playing Halo. And maybe even back then some of the Call of Duties before like Modern Warfare, but mostly Halo and Smash Brothers. Like that was my entire gaming life. And Knights of the Old Republic is what opened my eyes to like, oh, there are other experience to be had here. And like that has defined my gaming taste ever since, frankly. So Knights of the Old Republic, obviously a huge swing and a huge hit. Like and look, y'all, all right. Those of you who are yelling at your keyboards right now, I know that Knights of the Old Republic is not BioWare's first game, right? Like, I know that they made the original Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2. I know that they did Neverwinter Nights, which actually some friends of mine from high school were really into, but I never played those games, right? So this is about my experience with BioWare. I'm not trying to discredit anything they did before, just for what it's worth. But after that, again, my life kind of went back into the first person shooter, like mostly playing games like Halo 2, Halo 3, eventually Modern Warfare, Modern Warfare 2. And so again, I was sliding back into, like, you know, most of my gaming was just online and multiplayer. And of course, World of Warcraft was huge back then. But then came the MVP years.
You the real MVP.
BioWare came back swinging with my favorite releases of their history. And we're starting with Mass Effect 1. Mass Effect 1 is one of my favorite games of all time. Mass Effect 1 and 2 in particular. I mean, the whole trilogy. Mass Effect is one of my favorite series of all time. This is the original trailer for Mass Effect 1. And unlike Star Wars, where obviously they had the benefit of the IP that I already loved, Mass Effect was obviously a new IP, brand new characters. And what BioWare did to get me invested in these characters is honestly unbelievable. Like, the fact that they pulled this off in this epic of a way is something that every other studio wants to be able to do, right? This is an epic trailer, by the way. I haven't watched this since probably it originally came through. So good. But I wanted to talk about Mass Effect just a little bit, because obviously you've all played it, but there's two things that I remember distinctly. First and foremost, literally have the N7 helmet on my desk. This is from the Legendary Edition, the Collector's Edition. So I'm a huge fan of the Mass Effect series. One thing that I remember is I was playing Mass Effect, and I don't remember like where exactly I was. I think I was still relatively early on, but I was living in an apartment. This was after high school, so 2007. I was already living not on my own. I was living with a roommate in an apartment, and I got Mass Effect, and I was so excited about it, y'all. I was trying to convince all my friends. Like, there was that E3 where they showed off Assassin's Creed and Mass Effect, and I was hyped for both. And I was trying to convince my friends, like, hey, like, these games are gonna be great. Like, you gotta get invested. Like, these are gonna be good. And literally, I can't remember a single friend of mine who played it in real life. Like, I had no one to geek out about with it. But I played the game, and I'll never forget, we had bought movie tickets, a friend group of ours, and me, and it was like 5 or 6 people. We were supposed to be going seeing, I think it was Into the Wild, which I love that movie now, but I was so invested in playing Mass Effect at the time that when my roommate left, he was like, hey, you're going to ride with me? And I was like, no, I'll meet you at the theater. I just want to finish up this quest. And I got so sucked into the game Mass Effect 1 that he opened the door again. And in my brain, it had only been like 15, 20 minutes. And I was like, hey, did you forget something? And he was like, no, the movie's over. Where the hell were you? And like, this was back in the day. Like, we had cell phones back then, but not like it is now, right? Like, I didn't have a smartphone. Nobody that I knew had a smartphone yet. And in fact, the iPhone may not have even been released at this point. It came out also in 2007. But that's how invested in this game that I was, that like literally time was passing like that. And it just sucked me in, man. And like, honestly, I don't think there's any video game since then that has like filled me with this sense of wonder. You have these just amazing situations, like deciding what to do with the Rachni Queen here, and there being like no necessarily right answer, right? Like, obviously the Paragon choice is to save her, but you can obviously understand the decision not to, especially back then. I feel like going back and playing this in the Legendary Edition, it was like, oh, like clearly you're evil if you don't do this. But I remember thinking back then it was a very gray, shades of gray situation where it's like, what should we be doing here? Is this right or is it wrong? The other one that really sticks out to me is Ashley or Caden's death in Mass Effect 1. And I'm sorry, I should have like warned that there may be spoilers in here. If you've never played Mass Effect 1, sorry for that spoiler. But there's a point in Mass Effect 1 where you have to determine the fate of these characters. And it's either like, I'm going to save Caden or I'm going to save Ashley. And y'all, the way I had to walk away from the TV, like I remember getting to that decision and not knowing what to do and literally leaving it on the decision, like pausing. Not, I don't even know if I paused. I may have just left it static there on the decision. I had to walk away. I walked out of my apartment, walked around my complex, came back, had to decompress before deciding what to do. And I ended up going with Ashley because, I mean, like every good Bioware fan, like I had to go with the girl that I was potentially romancing, even though I ended up going with Liara because Ashley's a space racist. But I ended up going with Ashley because of that reason and no other reason, frankly. And that just really sticks out to me as this amazing moment. But anyway, moving forward, we have Mass Effect 2. Now, Mass Effect 2 is, in my opinion, the greatest, maybe not the greatest video game ever. Like, I'll take a step back. It is one of my favorite video games ever. It is, in my opinion, the best. No, I can't say that either. I was about to say it's the best sequel ever. And to be fully transparent, the reason I paused, like I've always said that Mass Effect 2 is my favorite video game of all time. The reason I paused is that more recently, The Last of Us and The Last of Us 2 have taken over those top spots. So I was about to say it's my favorite game ever or the best game ever. Can't say that because I love The Last of Us. I was about to say it's the best sequel ever. Can't say that because I think The Last of Us 2 is even better than The Last of Us. But I mean, it's still high praise to say this is one of my favorite sequels ever. Like, I don't know that any game has ever exceeded my expectations the way Mass Effect 2 did. And just the presentation of it, the characters, the improved combat, all of it was just such a treat. And I'll never forget, IGN actually put out the intro sequence to Mass Effect 2 early, and they flagged it as spoilers. Like, I wasn't tricked. Like, they fully said, like, this is the beginning of the game, watch it if you want to see what happens. And I watched it and I was so mad at myself for spoiling it, and which, like, immediately instant regret. Like, I wished I could have taken it back because I'm so mad I didn't get to experience that moment for the first time while playing it. And it's just this moment here where the Normandy is under attack. And let me just go back a little. Let's see if we can get to when it actually attacked. Man, so good. So it's this moment here where the Normandy is attacked. And literally people from the first game are already dying. And our ship, the Normandy, is already getting destroyed by these people we don't know, which obviously we know now are the Collectors. And just this opening was so freaking epic, man. And you immediately get into the action, and you're there with Ashley, at least in my game, because Ashley's the one that I saved. Damn, it's so good. And I remember being so angry that I had spoiled this for myself, and then I got the game and I played it, and I may as well have not spoiled it for myself because the feelings you felt playing it and the chills that it gave you still hit. Like, it still hit. If we get to the end of this little segment with Shepard right here, off into space, dying, like, man. Now, kudos to BioWare for a couple of reasons. One being, what an amazing way to start a game. What an unbelievably fun way to reset the character. Like, how do you explain that, oh, all your abilities are lost, and how do you explain a time jump and all of that? Just so smart the way they did this. And then setting it up like Cerberus is the one who saved you. Cerberus, the crazy fucking terrorist organization from Mass Effect 1, but like now they're the ones keeping you alive, and like you owe your entire life to them, and it seems like they're trying to save the world and nobody's listening to you. It's just everything about it is so good. And in particular, the inclusions of the Renegade and Paragon system, like the way they expanded that. If we go back over here just very quickly, I'm going to turn the volume up for this one.
Even if I knew where he was, I wouldn't tell you.
Not the answer I was looking for.
I've got nothing more to say to you. If you shoot me, my team's right.
How about goodbye?
How about goodbye? Now, first thing I'll say is it's so weird seeing other people's shepherds because, like, I always use the default, either the default male shepherd or the default female shepherd. And I think the making a custom characters in these games, they look so bad. Like the defaults are just so much better from a texture and from a graphical perspective that I could never not do it. So the clips like this where it's somebody's custom shepherd always freak me out. But the introduction of that Paragon system, when I used to play Bioware games, it was like all good or all evil, right? I would almost always do one playthrough where I was everything good, and then I would do one playthrough where I was everything evil. And with Mass Effect, it was always I was a good guy, Commander Shepard as the male version, and then I was a renegade femshep, and I just a badass. I'm gonna kill everyone. Stay out of my way. And this game introducing the renegade prompts like that, even as my Paragon Shepherd, I was like, I'm gonna push you out the window. Like it was the first time where I was like, oh, like maybe I shouldn't just go all the way one way, you know? And so I just thought that was really, really cool. Fast forwarding to Dragon Age Origins, their next game and a definitive game in the MVP years of Bioware. Dragon Age, I mean, Bioware could have put out anything after Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2, and I would have played it, right? I was on such cloud nine. Bioware had become my favorite developer. Mass Effect and Mass Effect 2 were my favorite games I had ever played. And then they announced Dragon Age Origins, and it was going back into fantasy. And like, as someone who had been really into World of Warcraft, as someone who obviously, as we talked about, had been really into EverQuest, going into this fantasy setting was right up my alley. So at the time, like the Lord of the Rings movies were huge and like all that. So, I was really into the Dragon Age reveal. I remember watching this trailer and getting really hyped. And my friends and I argue about this all the time. Like some of my friends hate cinematic trailers. And I know that it's become less and less like a thing. Like most companies don't do these types of cinematics anymore because people don't like them, right? People want to see gameplay. They want to see what the game's really like. They don't want to see like just this type of nothing cinematic trailer. I'm not one of those people. Give me all the cinematic trailers you can give me. Like I'm dead serious about this. I want to see all the great cinematics, especially from teams like BioWare. Like just put out full movies. Like I'm here for it. But this trailer hooked me in. Dragon Age Origins was my first CRPG, although I played it on Xbox where it could be a little more third-person action-y. But just everything about this game just continued my love from Mass Effect 1 and 2. Like we had the different character backgrounds where the game started differently depending on what race you picked and what your background for that race was. The initial, like the king getting betrayed when about to fight the Darkspawn, when Logain betrays them. That was like Game of Thrones before Game of Thrones, y'all. And like, don't fact check me here. Like, I'm pretty sure the first Game of Thrones book came out in like 1999, but ain't none of us were reading that yet. Okay. I didn't start reading Game of Thrones until at least 2 or 3 years after this. And so maybe actually like 2 years, whatever. I started reading Game of Thrones after I played Dragon Age Origins, certainly. And so those moments like felt like that style, that Game of Thrones, that like high fantasy, just like, that's my shit. All right. I want dark. I want gritty. I want moral choices. Like, whew, I was in. And then I'll never forget, there's one part in particular. I'm going to skip over here. The Landsmeet was, I think, the standout moment for me in Dragon Age Origins, where based on what you had done up until that point, based on the alliances you had made, based on how like high your character's influence was, and then based on your statistics, you could either fight your way through this part or you could talk your way through this part. And I think it's just such an epic, like, it's such a perfect showing of what BioWare is all about. You know, all the decisions you had made up until that point of the game coming through in one epic quote unquote clash. I wonder if they'll show, I wonder what the outcome that they picked in this one is. Like, look at this. We're 5 minutes into this video. We're facing down the big baddie from the entire story so far. And there's been no action. It's been all talking. And based on what we're seeing here, it sounds like this is a playthrough where they just talk their way through it.
It is you or me.
I'll fight this duel myself.
Follow. So,
Let us fight for it.
Now, the fact that there's so many different outcomes from this scene, the fact that you can either just straight up like behead Logan, right? Like you can sentence him to death and there is no duel by combat. The fact that you can either choose yourself or choose one of your companions to fight him and have like a trial by combat situation. Or the fact that you can convince him like, hey, you don't have to die here. Join us against the Darkspawn. And then Logan can be the hero of the story. Like Logan can give his life to stop the Blight. And such a great turnaround for that character. Again, I titled this section the MVP years, and it's because that's what it is. This was BioWare at the peak of its power. There's so many amazing things from this game. You have the Templars versus the Mages, which again felt a lot more gray when I was a kid. I remember thinking that was like such a fascinating, like, oh yeah, the Mages need to be controlled, but they're people, what to do? And like now as a 36-year-old, I play it and I'm like, no, the Templars are fascists. Like Mages deserve to have their own freedom. Tranquility is fucking bullshit. And frankly, the Chantry are awful. But I think that's the amazing thing about these games is they're such great allegories to real life, and the decisions do feel like shades of gray so often when you're playing them, including with the Dalish and the werewolves in this game, where it wasn't just like I was so used to BioWare, so trained by BioWare that there's a good choice and an evil choice. And the werewolf questline with the Dalish is fascinating because both of the choices presented are evil. Like, unless you get the full story and unless you do the quest all the way through to unite and like broker a peace between those two sides, both choices are wrong, right? Like if you side with the Dalish, which seems like the correct choice at first, you end up slaughtering people who like it wasn't their fault. Like the Dalish are the ones who caused that to them. And if you go with the werewolves, you end up having to slaughter the Dalish. And like, is it really their fault that their leaders did this? But you could broker a peace, and like, I just thought they took it to another level with this game in terms of the way your decisions were impacting the world, the huge ramifications they had towards the story, and then again, this brand new sprawling fantasy IP that I got sucked into. Unfortunately, what comes next is a little bit of trouble.
Here in River City, trouble with a capital T and that rhymes with P and that stands for pool.
There's trouble with a capital T and that rhymes with E and that stands for EA. Let's talk about the troubled years. Now, calling it the troubled years, I think, is a little dramatic. Like, I thought of the Music Man thing with the capital T and that rhymes with E and that stands for EA, and I was so proud of myself that I was like, well, this is what we have to go to. But in this section, I'm going to talk about Dragon Age 2 and Mass Effect 3, two games that I really like. But I think it's clear signs that there was trouble ahead for BioWare. So let's start with Dragon Age 2. Now, I don't want to talk too much about Dragon Age because, as I mentioned at the top, I'm replaying this game right now, and I'm going to put out a whole nother video where I've recorded a before replaying it, what do I remember, what were my thoughts at the time, and I'm going to then record a what do I think now after replaying it, 13 years later or whatever it is. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about Dragon Age 2. I will just quickly, like, as we let the trailer play here for Dragon Age. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the review from IGN. This is Christine Steimer, by the way. Go give Steimer a follow. She's great. But we'll let this review play. And if I remember correctly, Steimer gave it an 8.5, I think. So like saying that an 8.5 game was troubled is a little dramatic, and that's fair enough. I've just restarted playing Dragon Age 2 and I'm enjoying it. This game was rushed. Like, that's just a fact. Like, that's not even my opinion. That is a fact. Mass Effect 2 came out... No, Dragon Age Origins came out in November of 2009. Mass Effect 2 was released in January 2010. And then Dragon Age 2 was released March of 2011. That means there was roughly a year between Mass Effect 2 and Dragon Age 2 releasing. But even more so than that, there was roughly a year and a half between Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2. And they released Mass Effect in between. Now, I know that BioWare has different teams that works on these games, but that is an insane development schedule. And you can feel it every step of the way through the game. The game is plagued by reused textures, reused locations, reused animations, reused enemies, and all of that is problematic. And that's why the game gets dragged down to an 8.5. But what I remember is the story felt rushed to me. The story, I remember being really, really into it all the way through the first 2 acts. And then in Act 3, it just falling apart for me. Where, and again, I won't get too much into it. We're going to talk about it in the full Dragon Age 2 video. But just the ending felt extremely rushed to me and was not satisfying to me personally. And so I was let down by Dragon Age 2, despite playing it, despite beating it, despite really enjoying it, despite loving so many of the characters. Dragon Age 2 at the end of the day was a letdown for me. And it came right after Dragon Age being purchased by EA, right? Like those two things. I think EA purchased Bioware in 2007, and then Mass Effect 2 came out shortly thereafter. Dragon Age Origins came out, and then Mass Effect 2 came out shortly thereafter. And I'm pretty sure neither of those said published by EA. Like, I don't think it had fully gone through yet, or I don't know what exactly the story was, but the clear stories coming out of Dragon Age 2 was, oh, this game was rushed and it was EA's fault. Now, I've since seen reviews or interviews with the developers where they talk about the fact that, yes, Dragon Age 2 was rushed, but it was because we as BioWare were trying to show EA that we were a good investment. They really downplayed the fact that it was EA pushing them and, you know, said that it was BioWare just setting unhealthy timelines for themselves to try and prove to EA that they were worth the investment. I don't know if I believe that kind of revisionist history, like, or even if that is the case, I think that's just toxic, you know, corporate culture, shocking in America. But it was clearly rushed. Like, it just is what it is. It was rushed. So let's move on to Mass Effect 3. And Mass Effect 3 is an interesting one because I think the game is great. And so again, using the word troubled feels a little bit wrong to me. Like, using the word troubled is dramatic, and that's just a fact. Here's the initial trailer for this game, and I'm still get hyped by this. Now, I have notes in front of me. I don't know if you all have noticed, but I'll scroll on my iPad every once in a while. I have just bulleted thoughts that allow me to, you know, hit the points that I want to hit. I literally have just Mass Effect 3 ... here, and then nothing else underneath it. And it's because I wanted to just talk about it. I think Mass Effect 3 is an amazing ending to the Mass Effect trilogy. I think the entire game is the ending. Everything about you're meeting characters that you've met through the first 2 games, decisions you made in the first 2 games matter and impact the way the world looks and feels. Everything about it feels high stakes. The Reapers are here. They are destroying all of our planets. This is a last-ditch mission to stop them. It's fucking epic. And there are so many moments in this game that are so good. They are so good. Like, if we just go for, again, spoilers for Mass Effect 3. If you have not played this, please do not watch these parts. But things like this, anybody who's played this game knows what this is. This is Mordin sacrificing himself to stop the genophage, the thing that his people created that have stopped the Krogans from breeding for so long, something that he feels so guilty about. And this is the Paragon ending.
What happened? Stress sampling, too intense. Too much trauma. Get clear. Explosion likely to be problematic.
Mort, no!
Shepard, please. Need to do this. Need to see it through. For her. Would have liked to see how it ends. Sure you'll do fine without me.
I'm sorry.
I'm not. Had to be me. Someone else might have gotten it wrong.
Y'all, like, legit, I can feel myself, like, you know, that, like, shiver and then the feeling you get in, like, the back of your throat. I can feel myself tearing up, getting emotional years later watching this. Had to be me. Someone else may have gotten it wrong. If you played all 3 Mass Effect games, mostly Paragon, and got to this scene, there's no way you weren't crying like a baby. Like, if you weren't crying during the scene, you gotta seek therapy, man. Because there's something wrong. This is incredible. And then you have so many other unbelievable moments. I have this pulled up. I don't even want to show it because it's so awful. Like, I played through as Renegade on this, and I still feel terrible about it.
Time running out. Have to go up.
Mort, you're not going up.
Not concerned for my safety. Concerned I might discover something. Sabotage? But whose? Why, Shepard? That desperate for Solarian aid? Or that afraid of Krogan?
Every time we've talked about this before, you've defended the genophage. Hell, I had to talk you into saving Malin's data. How can you change your mind now?
I made a mistake! I made a mistake. Focused on big picture. Big picture made of little pictures. Too many variables. Can't hide behind statistics. Can't ignore new data. My responsibility. Need to go. Running out of time.
Morton. Walk away.
Can't do that, Shepard.
I don't have a choice here. Walk away, or I will fire.
Not your decision. Not your work. Not your cure. Had to be me. Someone else might have gotten it wrong. No time to argue. Cure dispersal imminent. Must counteract sabotage. Stop me if you must.
Mass Effect 3 is amazing, and when I say the entire game is an ending, this is what I mean. You have these two scenes that, depending on how you played it and the decisions you made, the characters are acting entirely differently, the outcomes are entirely different, and even though this is contained in this game, right, it's based on the decisions you made this game, it's based on how you're playing this game, if you've played Mass Effect 1 and you've played Mass Effect 2, it feels like more than that. It feels like it's connecting all the way through, and that is Bioware magic. Mass Effect 3 is an incredible, incredible game. There's so many moments like this. I won't detail them here, but there's so many moments like that throughout the game that are a clear send-off of the entire trilogy. And then the actual ending happens. And look, this is a side-by-side comparison of Mass Effect 3's ending. The problem with Mass Effect 3 and the problem with complaining about it is that there is a very, very loud, very large group of the fan base who took it so much further than it needed to go. You have so many people who sent the developers hate. You have so many people who are like part of the Gamergate crowd who are just awful. And I don't want to be tied in with them. But the Mass Effect 3 ending is bad. Like, the DLC they put out makes it much better, but the Mass Effect 3 ending is bad. You have this amazing game where so many of your choices matter throughout the 3 games, and you get to the ending, and the literal difference is what color the explosions are. And, like, there's been a lot of defense of this over the years, and I'm not here to change your mind. If you liked the ending, you liked it, and I'm not here to be mad about it either. Like, I think Mass Effect 3 is an amazing game. I just talked about how much I love it. I replayed the Legendary Edition when it came out, and I loved it just as much then. But the fact of the matter is we're watching it side by side in a game that the whole game, what matters was your choices. And at the end of it, no matter what choices you made, no matter how much support you got, no matter what you did, the difference you got between the 3 endings were just different colors. That's not good, y'all. It's just simply not good. And that's why I called this section Trouble, because I don't think Dragon Age 2 or Mass Effect 3 are bad games. In fact, Mass Effect 3 is one of my favorite games of all time. Dragon Age 2 I liked. But there was trouble brewing. The Bioware that made Dragon Age Origins, the Bioware that made Mass Effect 2, the Bioware that made Knights of the Old Republic would not have made some of these missteps that we saw in these games. And that's why I labeled it Trouble. So let's get into the last phase here, the phase that we're currently in, or have been in for some time.
Stop! Stop! He's already dead. God.
I love that clip from The Simpsons. Okay. BioWare since Inquisition, and you'll notice that I don't have Inquisition on this list. I'm not going to talk about Inquisition, partially because I'm going to replay it and I want to do a video about it later on, partially because I don't think it neatly fits into any of these. I don't think Inquisition was troubled. I think it's a really, really, really good game, and it's certainly not part of the already dead segment we're in here where we're going to talk about Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem. It's this weird kind of in-between where I think Dragon Age Inquisition is amazing. Like, it was a Game of the Year contender. It's my personal favorite Dragon Age game. I loved Dragon Age Inquisition. And so the fact that they followed Dragon Age Inquisition up with what we are about to talk about, Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem, is crazy. And it's why we named the last segment Trouble, because I think some of the somewhat minor missteps that we saw in Dragon Age 2 and Mass Effect 3 were precursors to what we saw with Andromeda and Anthem. So let's talk about it. I'll be frank, I put maybe 50 hours, maybe 40 hours into Anthem. I never beat it. I don't think it's a terrible game. I think it's an okay game. I think it's like a 6.5 out of 10. And when you're doing a Mass Effect sequel, it can't be a 6.5 or a 7 out of 10. It just can't be. It was a disappointing game all the way through. And so we'll start with the obvious. There were a lot of technical glitches. If you just do a search for Mass Effect Andromeda glitches, you can see there are literal pages and pages of glitches from Mass Effect Andromeda when the game first launched. Things like this, even when it wasn't outright glitching, some of the character animations and the faces they would make were just so ridiculous. And unfortunately, that all got out early, right? If you remember when Andromeda came out, it was either because they released like the beta or like the first mission or whatever early, but people got to play it and it was real bad and lots of memes got made. And even though later patches solved those problems, Andromeda just never recovered from the public perception after that, right? So then let's just move forward. Let's not talk so much about the glitches, because they did mostly fix them, but there are problems like what we just saw here with the graphical popping in. That kind of stuff doesn't really bother me. Like, if all it was just some minor glitches, some graphical issues, some frame rate issues, stuff like that, like, whatever, right? Like, the Mass Effect 1 didn't play well, like, but I loved that game. And so the problem for me with Mass Effect Andromeda was it just didn't... The characters were not as memorable as the first three games. The writing wasn't as tight as the first three games. The decisions didn't really feel like they mattered as much as the first three games. It just didn't hit any of the levels that it needed to hit as a sequel to one of the most beloved trilogies of all time. And I don't think you can argue with that, right? Even if you enjoyed Mass Effect Andromeda, I don't think it's arguable that it's on the same level as the previous games. And so, as one of the biggest Bioware fans like out there, like, I love these games. I will replay Mass Effect Legendary Edition again before whatever next Mass Effect game comes out. I will eventually beat Andromeda. Like, before the next Mass Effect game, that is something that I will be doing, is I will beat Andromeda and talk about what my actual final thoughts were. But it's a clear misstep. So much so that you have stories like this. The story behind Mass Effect Andromeda's troubled 5-year development. This is on Kotaku. This is by Jason Schreier. I highly, highly, highly recommend going and reading this full article if you haven't. Jason Schreier is one of the best in the business when it comes to reporting on the video game industry. But we'll just talk about this here. 5 years later, it's hard to find anyone who's ecstatic with the results. Mass Effect Andromeda, released in March 2017, disappointed even the biggest fans of BioWare's long-running series. Although some people enjoyed the game, it was widely pilloried, with critics slamming its uneven writing, frequent bugs, and meme-worthy animations. The PS4 version of Andromeda has a 70% on Metacritic, lower than any BioWare game to date, including the ill-advised Sonic Chronicles. Now, if you go through this entire article, it's really, really good. Again, highly recommend talking about. And I just wanted to call out this section here. Mass Effect Andromeda was in development for 5 years, but by most accounts, BioWare built the bulk of the game in less than 18 months. This is the story of what happened. There was trouble brewing, y'all. I told you in this video in the future. I told you this was happening. This is so worth the read. Highly, highly recommended. But this is the trouble I was mentioning before. Then we move on to Anthem. And I don't know if there's a game I've ever been more excited for than Anthem. Like, genuinely. I don't think I've ever been more excited for a game. I was never the biggest Destiny fan. I played it. Some of my friends got really into it. Some of my friends are still really into it with the new expansion that just came out. But I was never for me. Like, I prefer my story games, and if I'm gonna play multiplayer, I prefer multiplayer. Like, I don't like kind of the mix of the two and the like, I don't know. It just never stuck for me. when BioWare announced they were doing this type of game, I was like, holy shit, this is going to be the one. Like, this is going to be what gets me into this game. And then we started seeing the gameplay from it and the idea of playing a mech. And like, I was super into Iron Man. And like, I wanted this game to be so good. And the fact that it was so bad, like the fact that it released, died a quick and painful death, and got panned in reviews. Like, look at this game. There's an alternate reality where people are still playing this the way they're still playing Destiny, and everybody's having an amazing time, and I wish I lived in that reality. Let's come over here to the final verdict from IGN. I believe they give it a 6 or a 6.5, something in that range. 6.5. This is from IGN. A 6.5, okay. And the review isn't even that bad. The problem is this game died a painful death. Like I mentioned, like people stopped playing it almost immediately. The public reception was just as bad as the critic reception, and the game died, and BioWare was left adrift, right? Another article, again by Jason Schreier, again published on Kotaku. Highly, highly, highly recommend the read, but it's how BioWare's Anthem went wrong. And it's just, again, it talks about all of the issues behind this game, all of the issues behind its development, and that's where we're left off. That's where we are with BioWare today in the year of 2024. Their last game was Anthem. Well, their last game was the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, but that was always going to be a win, right? When you're just remastering one of the most beloved series of games of all time, it's hard to do that wrong, right? And they could have, like, it could have had technical issues or whatever, but they didn't. They did it well, and I love those. I love the Legendary Edition, and I'm glad they did it. But we haven't seen BioWare make a good game since Inquisition, and their last two games critically and publicly failed. Now we are leading up to Dragon Age the Veilguard, and everything that's been shown so far has me so very excited. I think similar to Inquisition, this game is going to be excellent, and I think it has the chance to be the best Dragon Age yet. But tell me what you think. What's your history with the BioWare games? Where was I wrong? What did I criticize that you completely disagree with? Are you one of the people that loved Anthem and is still playing on a vacated server somewhere? Let me know. But until then, keep an eye out for the Dragon Age video that I will do at some point. I also want to put out my ranking of BioWare games at some point as well, of just all the games they've put out ranked based on my personal tastes. So keep an eye on the channel if you're interested in everything that we're doing here. Give me a follow on Twitch, twitch.tv/TrimbleyWimbley. Give me a follow on Twitter, same thing, @TrimbleyWimbley, and you can keep up with all the stuff that I'll be putting out. Talk to y'all next time.